Greetings, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Women's Health Awareness Real Talk with the Experts November webinar. I'm Joan Packenham, Chair of the Women's Health Awareness Steering Committee and Director for the NIEHS Women's Health Initiative. On behalf of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the Women's Health Awareness Steering Committee, and our co-sponsors, the Durham Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Durham Alumni Delta House Incorporated, and the Public Health Department at North Carolina Central University, we are extremely honored to have each of you with us this evening and excited to bring you this important programming on saying no more to noise, how to deal with unwanted sounds in your community. I am excited as this is the first time the Women's Health Awareness Program has discussed the topic noise pollution. Noise can have a serious impact on our overall health. Using the framing of environmental justice, this session will discuss community noise issues in urban and rural settings, their sources, and their impacts on community health and well-being. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded to YouTube. Closed captioning is available during this webinar. Evaluations will be sent immediately following this webinar by email, and for completing the evaluation, you will receive education contact credit hours for your participation. Lastly, please take a quick minute and make sure you are muted. A few webinar housekeeping details. The Zoom Q&A is located at the bottom of your Zoom window when it is full size. It is important that your window be full size to access the Q&A function. Use the Q&A function during the Q&A session or if you have a question for staff. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our webinar chair tonight, Dr. Melissa Smarr. Dr. Smarr serves on the Women's Health Awareness Steering Committee and is intimately involved in our Environmental Justice Planning Committee to help plan these awesome sessions on environmental health-related topics and environmental justice. Dr. Smarr is a health scientist administrator in the Division of Extramural Research and Training, Population Health Branch for the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, National Institutes of Health. She has a broad research portfolio, including reproductive health, metabolic health across the life course, environmental epidemiology, environmental health disparities, and environmental justice. She is the chair of tonight's session and will now introduce tonight's webinar speaker. Dr. Smarr.
Thank you, Dr. Packenham, and good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce you all to our speaker, Dr. Erica D. Walker, the RGSS Assistant Professor of Epidemiology at the Brown University School of Public Health in Providence, Rhode Island. Dr. Walker runs Community Noise Lab and supports communities as they grapple with air, noise, soil, water, and visual pollution. She holds a master's degree in environmental economics and urban planning and a doctorate in environmental health. Adding to her numerous contributions to the field, Dr. Walker was recently featured in a National Geographic publication as an expert researcher on noise and well-being. Most importantly to the WA community, Dr. Walker worries less about obtaining tenure and instead is focused on truly honoring the public and public health. Without any further delay, Dr. Walker, the virtual platform is yours.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to share this growing work with you all. All right, let me just get my life together. Okay. All right, so every time I do one of these talks, I'm always reminded that I didn't come from this. So I'm very sort of surprised that I'm here, but excited to be doing this work. So I'm from Mendenhall, Mississippi, and I'm from a very small town, population 2,500. And when you look at it, it's a very rural setting, but if you kind of look closely in on this map here, you'll see that my community was intersected by two major highways, a creek behind it that flooded every time it rained, an open sewer lagoon, and a railroad track. So I was sort of always primed to be very, primed to be thinking about a lot of environmental issues in communities, even though I came from a very rural setting. But I kind of left that life behind, ran away to the big city, and decided to become an artist. So in my former life, I was an artist. I made coffee tables and I was a bookbinder. And my home, which was a basement apartment, was my studio. And one day, a family moved above me with two small kids. And those kids used to run across their floor, which was my ceiling, for like 24 hours a day. And in the process of trying to get rid of them, trying to figure out I was going to take them to small claims court, sue them, and get them evicted, I kept going back to these questions. And the one that kept weighing on me the most was, how is this impacting my health? So a trusted friend reached out to me and was like, hey, Erica, I think you really like this field called public health. Up until that point, I'd never heard of it. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. And on this journey, I'll talk to you about everything that I said that I was going to talk to you about, but then also it'll just help motivate why I'm here and why I think that noise is a very important but understudied environmental stressor. So my first approach, after I sold off all my equipment, moved out of my place, was to take an academic approach, which involved enrolling into public health school and studying noise and its impacts on human health. So just a little background about what is noise. So environmental noise is defined here. It's the physical and subjective exposure that connects urban planning, public health, and health of our planet. And sorry, my little thing is a little stuck. Hold on. Okay. And what is sound? So sound is essentially an audible wave that travels through a lot of different types of media, but we'll talk about the sound that travels through the atmosphere. And it's a wave pattern that is processed through the auditory system. So it's characterized by two main attributes, its intensity level or its quote unquote loudness, something that we're all used to talking about. Whenever we talk about noise, we talk about how loud things are, and its frequency, which we'll go into in a little more detail a little bit later on. I'm going to introduce it now, but we'll go into it in a little more detail because a lot of my work is dealing with the frequency. But frequency is basically the sound wave, the time it takes for that wave to repeat itself over the period of a second. And frequency is very important in understanding the character of the sound. So there are many different sources of sound in our environment. That includes industrial sources, non-industrial sources, and then natural sources. So in context, and I'll be throwing around some decibels throughout the presentation, but to just give you a little context about how loud things are. So a quiet library clocks in at about 30 decibels, and that's considered to be quiet. But as we increase our decibels, we'll see that things can be perceived as annoying, obnoxious, loud. So a quiet library, 30 decibels, a garbage truck, 100 decibels, a live rock concert, which I'll talk about in a little more detail later on, 120 decibels. So we have all of these different types of sounds in our environment, but the question is, how does noise impact our health? So I'm going to present to you a brief noise exposure model. So what we end up doing is we end up being exposed to some sort of sound, and our body processes that sound as something that's unwanted. If our body processes it as unwanted, they process it as noise. So noise is defined as unwanted sound. And it can take one of two pathways, or I'm going to say a third pathway, which could just be knocking out your hearing. So in a lot of occupational settings, you can be exposed to sound so loud that it can destroy your hearing. But the main pathways that we're going to talk about, especially when we're talking about community noise, is either through sleep disturbance, disturbing the quality and quantity of your sleep, or through this general annoyance, this sort of visceral negative reaction you have towards whatever you've been exposed to. So whether it's sleep disturbance, the quality and quantity, or this sort of visceral negative reaction, it sets off what we call a flight or fight response. And that is the same response you would have if you were walking down a dark alleyway and you encountered a ferocious pit bull. Your body is now preparing itself to either fight this threat or flee from this threat. And your body does that by, if you notice, like your heart begins to race, you begin to sweat, your body's releasing all of these stress hormones telling you run or fight. But if you think about that constant stimulation over a period of time, it can lead to these risk factors. And these risk factors over time can lead to the manifestation of some pretty severe, in this model, we see cardiovascular diseases, but you can also think of other mental health aspects as well, including anxiety, depression, etc. And here's just a brief overview of some of the epidemiology that shows the sound levels and the corresponding health effect. So we can see that decibels as low as 40 decibels, which is just 10 decibels higher than a quiet library, can lead to annoyances. But as we increase the sound levels, we can see some more really serious negative health outcomes. So that's a little brief primer on noise. So I decided to take an academic approach. I enrolled in public health school and did a bunch of different things. So you can see here, I'm here measuring sound in communities around Boston. If you see all these little dots here, these are all the locations I traveled to capture sound, and then doing a bunch of laboratory experiments to see how people respond to sounds that they're exposed to. And what was gained from that experience? Publications. But for me, I always like to say it's public health, not publication health. So even though I really appreciated the experience, I didn't find it particularly and ultimately fulfilling. Because while at the same time I was out in the community measuring sound levels in Boston, a lot of people would come up to me and ask, and like, first of all, ask, like, what are you doing out in my neighborhood at all times of the night? What are you doing? And in that process of trying to figure out what I was doing when I was measuring sound in their communities, they'd have these series of conversations, which led me to believe that the academic approach, while it has its benefits, it's not the complete picture. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these conversations I was having when I was out in the field doing measurements. Again, interviewed lots of different people, and all of these people who lived in different neighborhoods in the city of Boston just gave me different perspectives that I really wasn't thinking about. And in addition to interviewing people, I released a very brief, very crude survey trying to figure out what people thought about sounds in their communities. And I did this by housing everything on a website at that time called noiseinthecity.org. And that sort of was the house for all of my work, the sound measurements and the interviews and the survey responses that I was collecting at the same time. But I'm going to share with you a couple of really powerful conversations that I had that really helped to change the trajectory of noise in communities. So here is a couple that lives in East Boston. So East Boston may not mean anything to you guys, but it is the home of the largest international airport in New England, Logan International Airport. And I really like this quote: "There's some noise that I hear and some noise that I feel." So I'm going to kind of circle back to that frequency perspective when we think about sound. And we think about a sound wave, it's this wave that we process primarily through the auditory system. And we can see here two different sound waves. This sound wave is traveling a little bit slower over the period of a second, and this one is traveling a little bit faster. But because these are traveling at different speeds over the period of a second, they give the sound that you process different character. So this slower pattern over here would be what we call low frequency noise, and this higher pattern here what we call high frequency sound. And to put things into perspective, this is the bus that I used to take to work every day. And imagine yourself standing in front of a bus stop waiting for a bus to come and pick you up. So as the bus pulls into the bus stop, you'll hear the squeaking of the wheels. And the squeaking of the wheels would be that sort of higher frequency type of sound. And the cool thing about the higher frequencies, I don't know about cool thing, is that you can put your fingers in your ear and you can mitigate a lot of that high frequency sound. But as the bus is pulling in, that engine you can feel reverberating in your chest. And that reverberation, that vibrational component of sound is what we call low frequency sound. And whether or not your fingers are in your ears, that low frequency sound you can still process outside of the auditory system. I don't know if you've ever had sound that gets in your bones. So that's the kind of sound that is low frequency sound. And then there's another conversation of a lady who lives in the North End in Boston. And the North End is a very touristy area of Boston. And I like this quote too: "I am sensitive to noise. It seems to impact me more." And to kind of motivate what she was talking about, you see here two noise heat maps on your screen. So in this heat map right here, it says unweighted dB. This is just the sound levels across the city of Boston. Where the redder the sound areas are, the louder it is. And here's East Boston. East Boston is the home of Logan International Airport. And what's really interesting about this is that Logan International Airport, at least when it comes to the sound levels, is not the loudest place in Boston. There are much louder places in the community. But then if we look here and we look at this metric neighborhood loudness, which comes from the survey that I was mentioning earlier, we see here that while East Boston is not the loudest part of the city, the perception of loudness, or the noise perception, is much more severe. So as a budding public health researcher, the question for me was, well, which one is driving the health impacts? Is it the actual sound levels, or is it the people's perception of the sounds in their community? And that's one of the questions that I'm still trying to answer to this day. So we took all of that information, the sound levels that I collected and all those little red dots, the surveys, and all of the interviews, and we synthesized it into a noise report. And in that noise report, we had a bunch of different metrics that we explored, like aircraft annoyance, noise complaints, different noise metrics. We released a neighborhood noise report card where we graded each neighborhood on its soundscape. And at that time, I also released an app. This is version 1.0, a very crude version of Noise Score, which allowed people to measure sound levels in their community in real time and report on it in real time. So one of the limitations of the noise report that I released was it was just a snapshot in time. But with Noise Score, people are allowed to crowdsource information and use it for advocacy purposes. And here's just a little schematic of what Noise Score could do. And then we were able to feed these metrics into a live heat map, which we were able to filter by a bunch of different categories, including perception versus actual metrics, indoor versus outdoor noise, time of day, time of year, etc. So for me, a large part of my work is making sure that we develop holistic metrics that capture both sound and noise. So from this sort of community-centered approach, which is the sort of, I call it the purgatory between academics and academia and having conversations with community people, I learned a lot. I learned that that publications are relevant, but there also are these other publications that sometimes we don't pursue that are relevant to the community. So while I was working on publications that were relevant to my career, I felt like I was more interested in publications that were relevant to the communities that I was working with. An understanding of sound versus noise, a desire to peel back the layers, and a desire to be more than just a simple academic. So the next phase of this is what I call a ride-sharing scientific approach. So one thing that you'll notice about me is I'm very much an artist, and as artists, we believe in the iterative process, where throughout life, we're constantly refining and improving, so nothing is ever complete. So the sort of morphology of my research and the morphology of the story very much takes an iterative approach. So having had that academic approach, this community-centered approach, I wanted to conduct a approach that was relevant to both myself and to the community. And I felt that the ride-sharing academic approach would be most beneficial. And to define that, it is, I don't know if you guys have ever used Uber or Lyft and the feature where you can share your ride with other people, but this is kind of very similar to what I call ride-sharing science. So it's having a destination, but along the way, you pick up people who are going sort of in the direction, maybe not to the final destination, but you're sharing your ride with other people. So my destination was public health, and my hypothesis is that sound and noise can be harmful to human health, but the journey to that is going to be undetermined, and it's going to be largely driven by the passengers that we pick up along the way. So in the process of this ride-sharing scientific approach, I decided to start an organization called Community Noise Lab. And I decided to open my journey up to all kinds of communities. And these are some of the many communities that we worked with. And I just want to share a little bit about those journeys and then and keep it moving. All right, so when we work with communities, we support them with real-time monitoring. So we put up sound sensors in their communities. We do environmental surveying. We got an upgrade to the app. It looks like a lot better. And the mapping feature is now directly in the app. We do laboratory-based experiments. We do community engagement events. So some of the communities that we worked with, these are mostly in Boston area, because that's where I did a lot of my work. So they may not have relevance to you, but I think some of the stories you can relate to. So Fenway is a community that houses Fenway Park, which is a baseball stadium during baseball season, but during the summertime, it turns into an open live concert venue. So I worked with this community as they were at wit's end about this like repurposing of a baseball stadium into a live concert venue. And so it started out with one concert, and then it ended up being 16 concerts a summer. So we worked with them to collect data to support a good neighbor agreement between Fenway Park, Live Nation, the people who put on the concerts, and the neighborhood. Another neighborhood is the Mission Hill neighborhood in Boston, Massachusetts. And the Mission Hill neighborhood is a neighborhood that's right next to the Longwood Medical Area, which houses a lot of level 1 trauma hospitals. And it's also a neighborhood of Boston that was being rapidly gentrified. So we were interested in understanding the impacts of both. What is it like living next to a hospital when there's ambulances coming 24/7, helicopters, lots of transportation in and out. And a lot of the hospitals had their generators in the community. So these generators would kick on at all times of the day and the night. And then gentrification. So gentrification had really interesting aspects here, because not only did it change the acoustical expectations of the community, as I call them, quote unquote, natives were used to their community sounding a certain way. And the newcomers had different ideas about how the soundscape changed. And so there was a little friction between the two. And in addition to that, with gentrification came the building of more houses. So a lot of these houses were like triple deckers with their porches overlooking a park, but now these porches were overlooking a new development that had an HVAC system at eye level. So it also changed the way the community was shaped and changed the way that sound mitigated throughout the communities. And then we worked in a neighborhood, or this is actually a city called Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is heavily industrial, lots of industrial activity. It's also under the flight path for Logan International Airport. And it has a large population of undocumented immigrants. So I don't know if you guys remember, I had an app called Noise Score. And we know at that time, citizen science was a big thing. But we noticed that a lot of undocumented immigrants didn't feel comfortable taking part in those citizen science activities, primarily because of the name, and second, because the Noise Score app could be looked at as a surveillance tool. So working with communities that had apprehensions about working with citizen science, quote unquote, tools, and trying to develop other names for science that made it feel more accessible and inclusive. And then we also worked with a community in Andover. Andover, this particular community was next to this crazy figure 8 of highways and interstates. And the state would not put up a sound wall to help mitigate some of those sound issues. So we wanted to organize and collect data to argue for a sound wall. And then I think this is last but not least, we worked with an island off the coast of Portland, Maine. So there's the city of Portland, Maine, and there's an island off the coast of it. And during the off season, the island is really quiet. I mean, you can hear a pin drop. But during the summertime, the population swells from about 900 residents to about 15,000 residents. And they travel along the island on gas-powered golf carts. And sometimes we can be ugly tourists. And it just really changes the acoustical soundscape in that community. And then there's lots of flights and boats that travel to the island and fly over the island. And they wanted to organize and collect data to help mitigate some of the tourism impacts, including getting rid of the gas-powered golf carts and repurposing them into electric ones. So during that whole process of organizing with communities and collecting data, it made me realize that what I benefited from moving from an academic, community-centered ride-sharing approach was that we still were able to do publications, but ones that positively impacted the community. And it fostered in me a desire to be relevant and responsive, and a desire to impact positive change in the communities that I was working with. But something happened along the way. So at the tail end of this, actually right at the end of one of our community meetings, COVID-19 happened, and you guys all can have your own "where was I when COVID happened?" But I want to share a little story with you that kind of helps motivate the second part of this work, and motivates what I think true community research, community-based research should be about. So during that time, of course, a lot of people knew that I was a noise researcher. A reporter from the New York Times reached out to me and she was like, "Erica, it's so quiet where I live. How quiet is it where you are?" And, I went outside in my community, opened the door, and it was pretty quiet outside of my community too. So in the beginning, I was being led by this New York Times reporter, being prompted about how quiet it was when everyone kind of sheltered in place. But I knew better. I knew better because I had an app and I was able to kind of look at those responses. And I also, so in between me being a starving artist, I also moonlit as a high school mathematics teacher. But I had a student that reached out to me who kind of had been following my career, surprisingly. And she was like, "Hey, I know that you study noise. And I live in a community in Boston, which is predominantly Black and Latino. And there are fireworks popping off every night." Now, in my neighborhood, there weren't fireworks popping off every night. And had I just been listening to the New York Times reporter, I would have gone along with her prompt saying that it was very quiet. But what we ended up doing is we ended up going to these neighborhoods throughout Boston and setting up a sensor network to kind of understand what was happening in terms of firework activity. And through a series of community engagement activities, the city of Boston, with some of the data that we collected, was able to erect a fireworks task force. And we were able to kind of figure out which areas of the city were most vulnerable or at risk to firework activity due to a host of things, ranging from gunshot activity to socioeconomic status. We're able to put together all of that information into a risk index. And the city of Boston was able to use that information to sort of target where this illegal activity this illegal firework activity was happening, and to put educational resources to residents to kind of understand what this impact was. And again, these are some of the people in the fireworks task force. I released a lot of infographics. It was just really such a powerful convening of minds around an issue that would have been missed had I not been paying attention to the right places. And with that, we were able to create a fireworks safety guide that had stuff on noise and mental health, but also other things, other environmental issues as well. So that experience, going from academic to community centered to ride sharing to this incident during COVID, it made me realize that while I study environmental noise, it's also important for me to be aware as a researcher of what I call academic noise. And I define academic noise as focusing on the wrong questions, ignoring the right places, and neglecting the bigger picture. And I'm sort of embarrassed and ashamed to say that for a long time during that sort of COVID stay-at-home advisory, I was being led by the wrong prompts and the wrong questions. How quiet is it, Erica? New York Times, when I would have potentially missed out on what I feel to be I'm still curious about why that happened, interesting story with firework activity in Black and Brown communities across the nation. So because of those experiences, the researcher I am today, which is very much a work in progress, is wanting to make sure that I'm in the right place at the right time, asking the right questions and seeing the bigger picture. So the researcher I am today is what I call a storm chasing researcher, which means that I need to move directly towards the eye of the storm. And for me, that eye of the storm is back to my hometown and home state of Mississippi. But So what I wanted to do after that, I wanted to pack up all community noise lab stuff and be like, community noise lab is coming home. But what was I facing when I came back to Mississippi? So I'm just going to walk through a few newspaper articles that kind of helps tell the bigger picture. So we see there's some environmental racism, especially with wood pellet plants, something I'm very much interested in. Noise pollution loudest in Black neighborhoods, segregated cities, residents in housing projects being boxed in by crazy amounts of noise, airport noise in Atlanta, poor neighborhoods getting the worst of transportation noise, a community that is grappling with wood pellets. As you can see, I was gonna be tackling a lot, things that were a lot bigger than just simply noise pollution. And when I got to Jackson, there was also a water crisis. I don't know if you guys heard about the Jackson water crisis. It was very much a water crisis. So part of the storm chasing approach was having my own research agendas. I am 10 toes down for noise, but at the same time, understanding the beauty and urgency of pivoting to address my research interests, but also the interests that are happening in real time on the ground. So what I wasn't going to do was go into Mississippi and being like, I know your water's brown, but you want to put up this noise monitor? That wasn't going to happen. So what we did was we responded to the need to pivot, and that include tackling the environmental contaminants as they happened in real time. And for Jackson, which is where we started, water quality testing, water quality, anything to help with water quality was the most pressing issue. So Community Noise Lab morphed into a mobile tap water testing lab. And we got on the ground and started testing tap water and releasing results. So we also at this time started training. So if we can see here, there's high school students that we trained to test the tap water. So high school students operated our mobile tap water testing lab, and they in turn trained the next generation to understand what is in their water. We also got them interested in noise too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we also released a data dashboard that detailed the levels and the water quality in the cities. And we did this by city and zip code. That was on our website, it's still on our website. And then we also released community reports that talked about what was in their water. And we also talked about other things that we were doing too. Hey, we're measuring what's in your water, but we're also measuring noise pollution, air pollution, all of these other things as well. And then tackling that, some of the other big picture items that were happening in Mississippi that weren't noise was air quality monitoring. So we decided to put up an air quality monitoring network in Greater Jackson. I was at a community meeting and a woman raised her hand. She was very angry and she was just like, hey, I get that, but I live in a neighborhood where every 6 months I look outside my window and there's a billboard with negative messaging, and I just really hate it. It just really makes me feel really horrible. So we decided to also look into visual pollution. We also started an environmental health study looking at how things like tap water quality is impacting children's health. We did free hearing screenings at local libraries around the city. And we also released a series of environmental health literacy activity books. The two that you see here is about sound levels in hearing, and this one is about water. And due to all of that sort of pivoting, we were also able to do our publication. So we looked at boil water alerts and their impact on the unexcused absence rate in public schools in Jackson, Mississippi. And that may seem like a really kind of crazy thing to get into. But number one, I thought it was really great to interact with children in the public school system. But second, when I talk about boil water notices, I can just tell you, like, maybe you can probably count on the back of your hand the number of boil water notices that you encountered. But in Mississippi, they were getting up to 30 a day. And in some years, they were getting 1,500 to 2,000 boil water notices in a single year. And also kind of being open about my opinion and public facing about my opinion. So kind of going outside of the ivory tower and advocating on behalf of my research community and my community. I was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. So for me, this whole experience made it really important to focus on academic noise. And while you may say, hey, Erica, this conversation was about noise, I'm going to get back to that. But for me, I feel like as researchers, it's very important for us to not turn a blind eye to what's happening on the ground, whether or not that's our research wheelhouse. So I'm not a water researcher, I'm not a soil quality researcher, I'm not a visual pollution researcher, but because of the network that we have, we can find people to help us solve these problems. And by going into communities and addressing the issues that matter to them at the expense of what matters to myself, you show accountability and accessibility. And then when you talk to them about something like noise, they're more inclined to listen. So at the same time that we were in Mississippi, this wood pellet plant kept coming back to me. And this article was released at the end of this summer. And it's something that I had been worried about for many years. I don't know if you guys know what wood pellets are, but wood pellets are these pellets that are produced. They're supposed to be renewable green energy. They're produced and they're used for heating and they're used for energy production. And a lot of these plants are shipped all over the world, but these pellets are shipped all over the world, but these pellets are manufactured in predominantly Black and Brown communities across the South. But in Mississippi in particular, there's like 9 of them. And I don't know if you've ever been to a wood pellet community, but not only do they smell bad, they're very loud. So as a part of this kind of pivot to water issues, air quality issues, visual pollution issues, people were taking notice and they were saying like, oh, here's a person that's coming to my community and doing what she said she was gonna do. And so when I saw this article in NBC and I saw one of the people that was mentioned, Store of Chasing Science, Erica, picked up the phone and called the community organization and was like, hey, how can we help? And she was like, I know how you can help. You can actually come down here and help us to measure air pollution levels. So this town is called Gloucester, Mississippi. It is home to a wood pellet manufacturing plant. It's one of 9 communities in Mississippi that has or soon will have a wood pellet plant. And here is a doctoral student from Jackson State University who is running the show here and doing a tremendous job. We are putting up air pollution monitors in this community. We're doing both indoor and outdoor air pollution monitoring. We're also measuring sound levels. So here's 2 sound maps in Gloucester. As you can see here, the majority of the sound is directly at and around the plant. And you would think that this plant was just in the middle of nowhere, but no. If we go back to this lady's house right here, if you look out across her street, you can actually see the plant. So these houses are right up at the plant. And you can see here that if we compare sound levels in a town that has a active plant and a sound that doesn't have an active plant, you can see dramatic differences in the sound levels in those communities. And the same story can be had for air pollution levels as well. And in the process of doing all of that work, what's most important for me is training up the next generation of researchers to carry on this work. So I always say, never trust anyone that doesn't have a plan to share knowledge and give you the tools that you need to continue the work long after they're gone. So a big part of us is training up the next generation of researchers from all walks of life. We have students from historically Black colleges, from predominantly white colleges, from high schools, from community colleges. We have older adults. I'm just going to scroll back here. So we have 2 community members who are retired individuals who were retired woodworkers. They made all the protective cases for our air pollution monitors, and they're out there with us every week, putting up air pollution monitors, cleaning data, et cetera. So a large part of this is making sure that we train up the next generation of local researchers to continue this work. So what is gained in all of this from moving from a strictly academic approach to a community-centered approach to a ride sharing approach, to a storm chasing approach, what is gained? For me, it's a sense of peace. It's publications, or maybe not. For me, the most important thing is what I leave behind. And for me, leaving behind what is most important, leaving behind is a good reputation, but also tools for advocacy and a generation of researchers coming up behind us to do the work. So I would like to take my work, give the keys to the kingdom, and empower communities to do this work, whether I'm a part of that work or not. The importance of being at the right place at the right time. And as a researcher, the desire to be who I need to be in that moment. I don't know, as Dr. Smar was reading it in, in my bio at the beginning of this, I'm not really that interested in gaining tenure. If it's something that happens, it happens, but if it doesn't, it doesn't. What I want to be is I want to be the researcher I need to be in the moment. That could be a noise researcher, it could be a water quality researcher, or it could be just an observer letting other people guide that ship. And so I just want to take just a few seconds to just impart on you all the importance of demanding more from us as researchers. I have walked you through many journeys. As you can see, I am a work in progress. We're all works in progress. I would never trust anyone that didn't say that they weren't a work in process. But I want you to vet us, especially when we say we come to help. Who are we? Why are we here? Is there an off-ramp? Are you going to impart knowledge on us so we can continue this work? What are you going to leave behind? Who are you training within our community to carry on this work? And only work researchers who understand what you need. There's a big push now to do environmental justice work. For some, it's because there's a true passion, but for some, because it's a funding stream. Make sure you weed out those who do environmental justice work for a funding stream versus those who do environmental justice work because they really want to improve the situation and leave things better than what they found them. And demand tools, tangible tools for continued advocacy. So vet us and make us work for the things that matter to you. So as a researcher, for me, like I said, my wheelhouse is environmental noise, but I am open to all things. But again, make sure you make us work for our stuff. So anyway, without that is my presentation, and thank you guys for listening.
Amazing, amazing. I just feel like I learned so much that I wish I was taking notes the whole time. Dr. Walker, we cannot thank you enough for just imparting to us this wisdom about what we're being exposed to. As you said, we're not in Boston, but here in Durham, we do have a baseball stadium.
Yeah.
We do have major roads that were, strategically placed through certain neighborhoods. And we do, we're not too far from the RDU airport. So this work is definitely something that translates to our community as well. And we cannot thank you enough. But because this is the WA community, they are going to come prepared with questions.
Absolutely.
To know exactly what you told them, which is give us some answers so we can figure out how to handle these situations in our neighborhood. And so one of the first questions that we received is, how can we in our community get legislation passed to make sure that we're reducing the party noise in towns, neighborhoods, and also from institutions like Duke that blare music really loud for events on campus that nearby neighborhoods also endure?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's like the heart of all of the work that I do. So unfortunately, I'm gonna be honest with you. When it comes to noise, people feel like it's a first world problem. It's like, don't you have something else to worry about? So you're going to have to battle people not thinking that it is a serious issue. You're also going to have to battle people who are thinking that the time and money it's going to take for me to actually fix this, I'm not going to put that in there. So I'm just going to kick the can down the road and lie to your face and tell you we're going to do something, but we're not going to do anything. So you're going to be faced with people who don't want to do anything because they think that it's not a big problem and they think it's going to be too expensive to mitigate. But what you need to do is you need to organize, you need to hook up with a researcher like myself. You need to collect objective data in a way that holds up in a court of law. You need to organize, you need to survey to figure out how it's making people feel, to get that perception piece. You need to create some sort of report and you need to take it to whoever will listen to it. And you need to be loud. You need to be louder than the noise that you are being subjected to. So in my experiences, you're going to have to battle. What is it? Malignant feelings about this. People don't feel like it's an important topic, but you have to organize, collect objective data, and collect data on how it's making you feel through survey. And you need to demand that your politicians listen. So it's a lot of organizing and a lot of data collection.
And so in terms of data collecting resources, there's probably only one community noise lab, but do you know if there are other noise labs or other labs like yours who are willing to work with community members at no cost to the community members to gather this data, to collect this evidence, to help them figure out who to connect with as they're trying to organize?
Yes, so we travel.
Yay.
So we will go anywhere. So you can always reach out to us. And the answer is just yes. We just got to put you on the schedule, but yes. But I do know that, especially with acoustics firms, they're engineers who do this professionally day in and day out. If you get the right one, sometimes they'll take cases pro bono. And in some cases, the city is required to do this kind of noise mapping every now and then. So it could be just you leaning in on the city. So every city I have ever encountered has noise equipment. Like the police, when they go enforce the parties, they usually come out there with sound level meters. So I think that's equipment that that your tax dollars is paying for. So you can have them to use that to collect the data. So you can put them to work. But I think that myself, I would be glad to work with any community and give you the tools that you need to do this on your own. I'm not trying to stay there and I just want to help you out. But acoustics firms, some of them are very willing to work with communities pro bono. And then, like I said, a lot of cities have this equipment sitting around. It's just getting them to use it in a way that you need them to use it.
That's amazing. So that's great from the resources that, and then I think some of the questions that we see coming in and came in ahead of time that kind of touches on the other piece of that is, so we need the resources so we can figure out how to do this, but then how do we get the support? How do we get the people in power to care about the issues that matter to us? How do we get various groups or other areas maybe that might be dealing with the same thing to come together and to unite to actually make some change happen?
Yep, I'm gonna throw y'all under the bus. So funding agencies like the NIH, NIEHS need to fund this kind of work. I have been struggling to get NIH funding, especially NIH funding for the Gloucester work. It hasn't been successful yet. But I think the more that people put money into answering those questions and building evidence, the more likely people are to pay attention. And the less likely there is money to do these things, the less likely that work is actually able to happen, period. And we're not able to get that evidence to make people pay attention. So I think if there's a funding incentive, and I know that brings out the wolves and the sheep, but I think funding, and I think it's just talking about it, making noise. So if communities just sort of begin to talk about it, hey, we're out here collecting data, this is what we're doing, then it sort of unfreezes that kind of glazed perspective about it. So I think that a lot of help can change when the funding is there for us to do the work in a meaningful way, because that signals that this is important and this is something that we should be studying.
amazing. Thank you. And thank you for calling us out. You bet us too. I think one of the questions that we have that kind of leads to, like you said, the funding priority sometimes is, can you speak a little bit more to the impact of noise as it comes specifically to children's health? Children's health is a big
Yeah.
priority area for a lot of government agencies.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when you think about children, and we have a children's health study, we were looking at the impact of community noise on children's health. And so when you think about children, a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to start with a very basic one, the path of least resistance. A lot of our children are listening to devices where it's literally knocking out their hearing. We are currently seeing children's hearing loss at levels that is for people 3 or 4 times their age. So we're seeing dramatic hearing loss in children. We're talking about 12, 13 years old. So think about when you have hearing loss, are you hearing your lessons? I had one kid come up to me and was like, I can't hear anything because there's ringing in my ear. So children have tinnitus. They have hearing problems. Like, it's just amazing. So imagine a child trying to get a quality education when they can't hear. That leads to a whole host of public health and well-being outcomes that follow that trajectory of, not going to school, not, dropping out of school, et cetera. So there's that tremendous hearing loss issues. But thinking about being exposed to loud sounds or disruptive sounds when you're in the part of your childhood where you are growing and developing, when you're learning to listen to words or read and all of those kinds of things, thinking of that, or thinking of being so stressed at a young age that anything related to stress is being harmed during that process from starting from a very young age. So it can lead, and like we're seeing kids with lots of blood pressure issues, like so young, and imagine that trajectory over their life course. I don't know, I just think that there's some cognitive, educational, cardiovascular health implications with noise exposure that is happening, that is just going to severely dampen the health and well-being of children, maybe even impact the length of their lives.
Yeah. That's actually, it's very concerning. And I think it's, we think about, I'm hearing what you're saying about the various types of exposures that we're getting. And some of it we obviously could tell it's knocking out our hearing. And then there's others that maybe has like this overtime cumulative type of impact because we're not really aware of what we're hearing. And so I guess building off of that, one of our audience members asked, is there anything that they can do when it comes to them being exposed to loud, shrill, sharp noises, something like a dog barking, and they're being exposed 14 hours a day?
Yeah.
And what can they do? And then what should they be concerned about from a health perspective?
Yep. So first of all, your city or town has a noise ordinance on deck. So that sounds illegal. So I don't know. I would first consort, or not consort, I don't know what I'm just made up that word, but I would first look at my noise ordinance, locate the noise ordinance. And it is a ordinance that tells you what should be loud, when it should be loud, down to the time of day, day of week. So I would start there. Barking dogs and stuff, that is a crime. That is a violation of the ordinances. And I would start there by looking to see if there's some sort of civil way that you can get that issue resolved. Now, again, people don't take noise issues seriously, at least yet. I would also start collecting evidence, right? Like I said, the best way to build a case for noise issues is to collect evidence. And that means measuring sound, talking about it, talking about the way it makes you, like writing these things down and organizing with other people who are bothered by those things. And I always hate giving these sort of mitigation things because I always feel like it's kind of like putting the onus on the victim to to mitigate the situation.
Yeah.
But I don't know, in my house, I have a white noise machine that plays a sound that's very similar to being in an airplane.
Mm.
And it dampens, because I live right next to a major highway. It dampens that sound. So there's some sort of what they call masking. It's something that you put in your house to play to kind of mitigate those. I'm not saying I think that this is horrible that I'm even telling you to do this, but that there's that kind of stuff. And then there's earplugs, there's noise cancellation things. I hate saying that.
Mhm.
But those are some things that can give you temporary relief. But that is concerning, because every time you are every time that sound you're exposed to, it is alerting that flight or fight response, and your body is entering into a stress response. And that consistent stimulation over a period of time is injuring your health. So, doing something about it in those ways, even if it's temporary, it may give you the relief that you need to just endure.
And
But
it sounds like
organize, collect data.
constant weathering of the body, stressing on the
Yes.
body. And so we're gonna have to get you to come back definitely in April to the Women's Health Awareness Conference to talk more about
With
uh,
noise plugs and all the
yeah,
earplugs. Yeah.
exactly. But I want to touch on something that you said because I think it connects to some of the questions that we've seen. I thought it was really important that you said, I'm not trying to put the onus on those who are experiencing this
Yeah.
exposure. And so thinking about who the onus should be on, we've had a couple of questions that came in about, is this an issue that property managers or the police have a responsibility to address? And then someone else even said, hey, I live in, NYC and others. I know that in NYC and other cities, there's a phone number you can call and report these problems. And so when it becomes a code violation, is this now something that the police or property managers or others have the responsibility to address?
Yes. But I think they are an intermediate step. What we are seeing is an intentional implementation of horrible urban planning policies.
Hmm.
And we can think about that when they decided to put highways in predominantly Black communities. This is intentionally horrible urban planning policies that that police. Yes, you can call the police. I've done it. My upstairs neighbors, I call the police many times. You can do that. But they're just sort of like temporary medication. We need to address the fact that the noise issues that we face in our communities is because we don't think about it. It's not on the forefront of our brains when we're planning our cities. So
Mhm.
it is because of horrible, intentional in some cases. I mean, the Gloucester, Mississippi, who greenlit a wood pellet manufacturing plant to be positioned in the middle of a community.
Right.
That is intentional, horrible planning policy. So it starts there. And when there is horrible planning, there needs to be a conversation about how we undo that harm and how we in the future make sure that we don't continue to do that, to inflict that harm on other people. So yes, your landlord, property owners, they can give you temporary relief, but ultimately that's just pushing cards sideways. If we want systematic, permanent change, it has to be questioning the people that make the decisions to put these things in our communities to begin with.
Nice. And then I guess one thing to think about then is, you just identified who's aware of this. From your knowledge, are medical professionals aware of, noise pollution? I know a lot of times at NIHS, we have a lot of our colleagues who do work that's trying to educate medical professionals about just the importance of standard in traditional environmental exposures. But are you aware of to your knowledge, is this a type of exposure that medical professionals are aware of? And then B, is there something that community members or an individual who feels like they're constantly being exposed, like the person to the dog for 14 hours,
Yeah.
should go into their medical professional's office to say, hey, I've had these types of exposures, or can you do certain types of screenings or things to make sure that my health is not being impacted?
Yeah, I don't like I said, noise is not, it's not in the top 10 list of sexy environmental exposures. So people are just not, they're just not with it, just like go get some headphones. You decided to live where you live. You
Yeah.
did this to yourself. That's kind of like the mentality. But I think that that's something that's very important. Now I have to admit, that the occupational setting, they do a great job, like, especially with OSHA and NIOSH, they do a really great job in regulating in an occupational setting, but we need that same thing in a community setting. And the EPA used to have an office for noise abatement in the 80s, like big shoulder pads and an office for noise abatement. So we need that same kind of oversight that can put these directives in the hands of doctors and be like, you need to pay attention to these things. But when we're doing hearing screenings in the community, some of those kids are like, I've never had a hearing screening, or I had one when I was in kindergarten. So even something like that um, could be, yeah.
No, I think that's great. I mean, starting there is just it's a start, first of all. I feel like it's always important in the WA community that even though we talk about the tough stuff and the ugliness of exposures, that we leave off on a positive tip. And so one of our presenters wanted to just first tell you that this has been a great presentation, and I think we all agree.
Thanks.
But they wanted to know if you could just share an encouraging word for young professionals that are wanting to advocate for their communities, but they just really don't know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I was an artist. I thought I was going to be a world famous furniture maker and bookbinder. Um, I, how do I say this? I think we sort of, when we talk about passion, we sort of talk about it in this kind of the secret, guru kind of way. I really encourage you to start with your passion first. Like, find what you really, really want to do and be unapologetic about it. I think that we have a lot of people in this world doing things that they don't want to do. They're doing them for a paycheck, they're doing them because it's their expectations. And for me, I always thought I was going to be a furniture designer. Like that was going to be my life until this chance encounter sort of put me in the direction where I now see to be my passion. And through this whole iterative process, kind of refining that passion. So I always say, even if it sounds strange, even if it's, I want to open a donut shop, or I want to do this, or I want to just find, like, be honest about that, and then go 10 toes down, be unapologetic about that passion and do it to the best of your ability. Because we live in okay, I guess you said to be, to be positive, but I say really, because I was gonna say we live in a cutthroat world. Like, you got not only do you have to have passion, you have to have passion, you have to be the most passionate. But find your passion. I think do what you want to do. And I know that sounds really crazy, but do what you want to do. And if it is something like studying noise, do it, and do it unapologetically, 10 toes down. Do it better than anybody else. That's what I would say.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And right before we close out, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned you were an artist. Those beautiful flyers that you did for each of those communities, did you do that artwork? And see, there you have it, bringing your purpose back to, you still are bringing in some of your artistic experience into helping communities and tying it into your public health. So again, I sincerely cannot thank you enough. I myself learned so much from you tonight. I know you're under the weather and you still stuck to your word and came, even though you were under the weather, to be with us tonight. And so I thank you. I think the entire audience and WA community thanks you. And we look forward to hearing more from you. And hopefully that will be at our upcoming conference in April. And so with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Dr. Joan Packenham. And again, extend our sincere thank you and well wishes to you, Dr. Walker, as you continue to heal and feel better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, what a wonderful, wonderful session tonight, a very passionate session. And as you know, I too am all about community needs and trying to address the community's needs. So understand that passion. So thank you so much. And I just want to let everybody know she will be back in April. And not only is she coming back in April, she's going to bring her community from Tougaloo College from Mississippi. They'll be coming on with us live from Mississippi to Women's Health Awareness through virtual. And so we're just excited to continue this relationship and to have this opportunity to work with you and to collaborate with you as we move forward. So thank you very much, Dr. Walker. And please don't go anywhere because we want to talk to you just a brief moment afterwards. But I just have to do some housekeeping things. And so we have resources on noise pollution, just like we've had resources for all of our other webinars. So please visit our website in the near future for a full listing of resources on noise pollution and where you can go to learn more about noise pollution, or perhaps there may be even a resource on where to report noise pollution in your community. So for attending this this seminar tonight and for doing your evaluations, you will be sent by email the evaluation. You can receive the contact credit hours for being a part of the webinar tonight. So make sure that you complete your evaluation so you can be a part of the certificate of attendance. I just want to remind everybody that for completing that, you also can be a raffle winner. So our raffle winner from last month's Real Talk with the Expert webinar series on domestic violence is Ms. Natalie Jefferson from East Orange, New Jersey. So we are reaching people in other states beyond North Carolina these days. And so congratulations, Ms. Jefferson. We'll be in touch with you soon. I want to remind everybody that we're having our 10th anniversary of the Women's Health Awareness Conference. Registration will open on January 3rd, 2024. The event date, April 13th, 2024, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we're at a new location this year. It will be at Hillside High School. We needed a location that had more space for us. So we will be at Hillside High School and we look forward to seeing you there. Our next webinar will be in January of 2024. The date of the webinar is January the 11th, 2024. So please put this date on your calendars. The focus of the webinar will be on autoimmune diseases. The NIEHS Women's Health Awareness Program, the WHY Steering Committee, and our co-sponsors would like to say, wish you a happy Thanksgiving at this time, a joyous holiday season, and an early Happy New Year. We look forward to seeing you in 2024. Thank you for your continued support and attendance. And as always, have a great evening. Be well, stay safe, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for coming and participating in this outstanding webinar tonight. Thank you and good night.